Okay, a while ago when I gave you the list of different ways to solve a quadratic, the second thing on the list was square root property, so that's what we're going to look at now. So we're asked to solve this by using the square root property. As far as the way you need your equation to be set up, that's going to be different than what it was just a minute ago with the factoring. In this case, you will want whatever is squared to be on one side by itself. So since what I have squared is x squared, I need to first work on getting it on one side of my equation, like I said, by itself. So you would need to start here by adding the 7. So I would have 2x squared is equal to negative 8. And then I would have to divide both sides by 2. So I would have x squared is equal to negative 4. Alright, so once you've gotten your x squared by itself, now you're ready to apply what's called your square root property. So you're going to take square root of both sides. So if you take the square root of x squared, that's just going to leave you with x. Because when you take the square root, that's going to undo a square. Or if you have a square root, then you square it to undo it. Those operations undo each other, like adding and subtracting undo each other. Now you're also going to have to take the square root of negative 4, which we'll look at simplifying that in just a second. But one other thing that you've got to remember when you take square root of both sides, when you get to this step, you do have to put plus minus. And that's just because, and I'm just going to throw out a random number here, but like 6 squared gives me 36. But negative 6 squared also gives me 36. So a positive and a negative, when you square it, will produce the same answer. So that's why here you've got to put the plus minus. Like I said, that was just a random number there. That doesn't apply to that problem specifically. Okay, now simplifying the square root of negative 4. Now in the previous section, we looked at taking square root of negatives. So again, what you're going to do is actually separate the negative from the 4. So you could just say, well, that's negative 1 times 4. And you learned that of course you already know square root of 4 is 2. But then you learned in the previous section that square root of negative 1 is I. So this one actually has answers that are imaginary. Now these are still quadratic. So if you remember, I told you quadratics always have 2 answers. And of course the plus minus is what gives me the 2 answers. I have a positive 2i and a negative 2i. Okay, next one. Now this time, what I have that is squared is not just x. So what I have squared this time is actually this set of parentheses, this binomial. So like I said, whatever it is that's squared, whether it's a binomial as you have here, or whether it's just an x like you saw a second ago, you need to have it on one side by itself. So in order to get that part that I've circled by itself, then you're going to have to divide both sides by 3. So that will leave me with x plus 4 squared is equal to 7. Okay, now again, once you have that by itself, now you take square root of both sides. So since this is squared, when I take the square root, that's just going to make your square go away. And you're just left with the expression that's inside the parentheses. Okay, this is where you put your plus minus. And of course, you also have to take the square root of this side, which will give us square root 7. Now, if you can do any simplifying with the radical, you would. But like in this case, I can't simplify the square root of 7. So last step, to get x by itself, I would need to subtract the 4. So that would give me negative 4 plus or minus square root 7. So again, there's 2 answers here because you've got the plus minus. Okay, one more that's similar to this one that I've just finished working. Now, again, I've got a parentheses that's squared. So again, I do want it to be on one side by itself, which this one's already that way. So I'm ready to take the square root of both sides as my first step on this example. So when I take the square root of this side, the square is going to go away. Put your plus minus, and then we're going to have square root of negative 27. Now, as I told you just a second ago, if you can simplify this, that does need to be your next step, and there is some simplifying I can do here. Okay, first of all, since it's negative, I do need to separate it. So then when I look at just the 27, I do have a perfect square of 9 that will go into 27, so I need to break this down as 9 times 3. Okay, so square root of the 9 will give me 3. Square root of the negative 1 will give me I, and then this 3 is just left underneath the radical. Okay, so I've got my radical simplified. Now let's just take the steps we need to get x by itself. So start by subtracting your 8. And then last divide by 2. Okay, now some books will leave it here. Some textbooks have you go ahead and divide the two terms. So like for instance, dividing here would give you negative 4 plus or minus, and then you could have 3 halves I square root 3. A lot of the times they'll go ahead and write it this way. Now if you leave the I square root 3 on the top here with this 3 all over 2, then that's perfectly okay.